Hello, this is Beth Hovis, your sweet urban living lady. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so glad to have you here today. We're taking a little bit of a different journey. I'm not going to have a guest with me this week on the podcast. I'm going to be talking about some things in the next few weeks that have to do with Christianity, believing in God, and some of the things that are used in natural health that some believers have been told to stay away from, and with good reason. But I want to call this series that I'm going to be having Reclaiming What God Created. So welcome. I'm glad you're here with me. Now, just to let you know, we do have a few more podcasts that we're going to release of the Healer's Journey. We have a few more episodes of that to release as well. But I wanted to release this. I wanted to start working on this. This has been in my heart for a couple of years since I started the YouTube channel just over 2 years ago. But even before that, when I taught for a well-known naturopathic school who teaches all kinds of things. I taught the herbology program. I taught the iridology program. I was part of the core program for holistic wellness practitioners, their certified natural health practitioner course and their certified holistic health practitioner course, as well as several other courses that I wrote programs and courses for. And I just, one of the things that I was invited, just to give you a little history, first I was invited to teach iridology. And that is how I started working with Trinity School of Natural Health, was in their iridology program. And then I was invited to help with the herbology program. And then I was also invited, like I said, to help with these other core programs. And one of the courses that we were going to have in this overall core program that several instructors contributed to, one of the modules was on energy. And it was to be included in the course on energy was to have the body's energy, the energy of the human body, as well as how the energy outside, electromagnetic fields affect us. And one of the things that when the course was being discussed was, some of the students kept going, let's have something on crystals, because that does fall under, like energy or energy healing. And so, knowing that that was going to be part of what was going to be included, I just went to the Lord and prayed and just asked, Father, this is something that, even though I wasn't really one to use crystals a lot, or I had a few or something like that, I wanted to take on that chunk, because I wanted it to be presented. I wanted it to be presented from a biblical view, from a grounded in what does God think about this view. So I'm glad you're here with me today, because we're going to go through and explore crystals. We're going to talk about chakras. We're going to not do it all today, but we're just going to start exploring what does science say about these things, and where do scripture and science meet? Because as we explore God's design for healing, it's going to be through science, it's going to be through discernment, and it's not going to be through superstition. I don't want to include superstition, and yet there's a very real need for caution in how we proceed with things. But one of the things that I love, one of the people that I heard put it a certain way is Arthur Burke, and he said God was there first. And when he says God was there first about a lot of different things, what he means is God is the one who created it. God is the one who created our bodies. He's the one who created the rocks and the mountains and the oceans and the waters and the crystals. And so I love helping people understand how faith and natural healing can actually work together without fear, without compromise. So one of the things in my background is I used to teach high school science. I taught physical science to ninth graders, and I loved it. This was when my kids were still in school. My youngest was still in school, and I was invited to teach physical science. And that was one of those things where at first I'm going, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? Because I was more of an English girl, or get me into the literature class, or let me teach drama or something like that. The physical science wasn't so much my thing, but it actually became one of the favorite times of my life. And lab days were my favorite days because that meant that we were going to pull out the equipment and we were going to do experiments and we were going to have fun learning. But before we did anything, especially before we lit anything on fire, because that was one of my favorites. I loved getting the different minerals because they burn different colors, right? And we would light them on fire. And so always it's put your safety goggles on, safety first, safety first. And so before we did anything like that, I would begin each session with safety first. And that's the principle that I want to apply here today, and that we need to apply when it comes to natural health too. Before we experiment, before we explore, when we're learning about the body's natural design, we begin with safety, spiritual safety first. We begin by remembering who created everything. It's the Father of lights. And when I was teaching for Trinity, one of the things that I was invited to do was to write blogs. And I wrote 2 for them. They're on their website. They're on my website. I'm going to put the link below. They gave me permission to use them on my website as well. And one was chakras and Christianity, and the other was crystals and Christianity. And so with that said, it was like, okay, because I'm doing the energy, because I had to learn about crystals and put a module together on crystals, I did it from a biblical point of view. I pulled up how crystals were used in the Bible and things like that. But I wrote those 2 blogs and they got so many hits. I mean, one of them got over 300,000 hits. And this was a few years ago. The other one, I think, had over 75,000. And so one of the things, if you go back and read my blogs, is I remind us of where everything began. It began by God creating it. And it began from what the Bible calls God is the Father of lights. And that's in James 1:17. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. And so that verse is going to set our foundation, because if every good and perfect gift comes from above, then it's our job as believers. It's our job, right? To not be afraid of what He has created. Not look at it and go, oh, well, the enemy has it and now we can't use it at all. Just because something has been taken, just because something has been used in ways that God did not necessarily means it's a bad thing. And so that was the idea behind what I wanted to bring about with my blogs on crystals and the one on chakras too. And so we're talking today, right, about crystals. And it's one of those hot topics. It's a hot topic. And I understand why, because I see a lot of, when you go and you look for information on crystals, it's a lot of it is wrapped up in New Age understanding and New Age spirituality. And for many, that is a big no-no sign of, well, if it's used in the New Age, then we can't use it. But what I think it does is it mixes error with the truth. And what we want to do is go back to what Arthur Burke say, and remember that God was there first. He's the one who created the crystals, right? And so misuse doesn't make something evil. That's the thing, is I'm actually using electronics. I've got a camera, I've got my computers, I've got, my iPhone, we've got television sets, and we can go and we can turn on these devices and we can either watch something good, read something good, or we can read something scary or bad. I mean, there's plenty of bad news out there today, and it's like all you have to do is open up and go, go different social media sites, and you will see bad news, scary news, whatever it is. And so that doesn't make the technology bad, right? And if someone uses the technology for bad things, to do bad, I don't want to give scenarios on that, but I'm just going, people commit crimes, people do things with technology, with computers, with video, does it make the technology bad? So if it's misused, then is it because we've misunderstood what God's purposes are for this, for us and for crystals? So that's where I'm just saying, let's have a conversation and let's explore, because even though I'm saying, hey, let's explore, this doesn't mean now just go out there and just, it's that safety first. Put your safety armor on first, right? Because if we stop using everything that's been distorted, if we stop using things that some people use in not good ways, then we would have to stop using herbs. We would have to stop using essential oils. And that's one of those things. When I first got into the natural health field, a lot of people were like, well, you're practicing witchcraft, just because I was using herbs to support my body. And the Bible actually says that the herbs are for the healing of the nations. The trees of the leaves are for the healing of the nations. And so we've gotten some things where I think we've gotten afraid, and we've let caution make us just stop using it. And what we really need to do is we need to explore what God intended. And so God's people need to walk in discernment. I'm calling us to walk in discernment, not in fear. And so discernment has us asking simple questions like, well, where does this come from? If I'm using crystals, does it honor the Creator, or does it bypass Him for power? And so that, to me, what is the source? That is one of those things, because a lot of people use crystals and they look at crystals as being the healer, rather than just a healing instrument. When I take my herbs and my herbal supplements, when I drink a cup of herbal tea, I don't look at that as being the something superior that heals me, that bypasses the Creator's power. I look at it as something that He created. He did say that the herbs would be food for us, right? And food has nutrients in it. It gives us nourishment. So are we going to the Creator, or are we bypassing and using something else? Because I've used crystal. In fact, I've got on Howlite right now. I've got this next to my smartwatch, because it helps dampen and absorb the electromagnetic field that I was talking about that can cause issues for the body. It helps absorb that negative energy. So what is its purpose? That's the question. And why am I using it? What is its source? What is its purpose? What am I using it for? Is it meant to heal and glorify God, or is it meant to manipulate certain outcomes? So what is its source? What does it produce? What is its fruit? What are we looking for? Does it bring peace and humility and wholeness, or does it bring pride and confusion and dependency? So these three questions are kind of at the basis of where I got started with, well, should we just not use crystals at all? Well, because if that's the case, then we need to take off our diamond rings and our jewelry that has gemstones in it, because they're a type of crystal, right? So we really want to, and just instead of just throwing it out, we want to look at the beauty of God's order and why did God create it, and did God use it? Because like in my article that I talk about, and in the class that I taught, I looked at the stones, the crystals that were in Aaron's breastplate. The high priest of the Hebrew people, when they came out of Egypt, the high priest had a breastplate that was encrusted with different stones that he wore. And then on his shoulders, he had black onyx on his shoulder. And so there were certain things that, God said we're going to use these crystals for a reason. And then we look at Revelation. So that's at the beginning of the Bible. And at the end of the Bible, we have Revelation, where there's the New Jerusalem, and each of the 12 floors, layers, foundations are built out of different crystals. So the Bible is not shying away from using them, and there may be a reason to have them. And Romans 1:20 tells us that since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. So when I study creation, whether it's a plant cell or a nerve pathway or the crystalline pattern of a mineral, I see God's fingerprints everywhere. So to me, science is not canceling faith. Science doesn't cancel faith, it confirms it. When I'm talking about the chakras, which we'll talk about more, I talk about the nervous system and the endocrine systems and how these systems are energy pathways, right? And God created them with an order. He created them to be orderly, to respond to light and sound, to have structure, to have symmetry, and to communicate. And so creation, when I say that, when I'm thinking about, well, we understand that our nervous system is communicating because it's sending nerve impulses, throughout the body. And we know that our endocrine, or our glandular system that secretes hormones, is those hormones are also sending messages. They're sending chemical messages throughout the body, right? So we've got electrical energy and chemical energy that is going through the body, sending messages. It's speaking, as it were. Our bodies speak to us. We'll say things like that. What is your body telling you? When a part of your body is achy or whatever, what is your body saying to you? And, but the body really does respond. And so creation testifies of a designer. Psalm 111:2 says, "The works of the Lord are great, studied by all who have pleasure in them." And so to me, that means that studying creation can be worship when it's done with the right heart. So what I'd like to do is just talk about how we as believers can use crystals without being afraid of, that we're dabbling in witchcraft or New Age or something like that. And to invite those who are using them to consider how to use them in such a way that brings glory and honor to God. So, what are crystals? I just want to kind of get into what are crystals? So on the website, Science for Kids, I found a really good definition for crystals. They put it this way: crystals are a special kind of solid material where the molecules fit together in a repeating pattern. This pattern causes the material to form all sorts of unique shapes. Now, that was really good for me because I'm like, I like simple definitions. I'm like, okay, so you're putting it together, and when you put these crystals together, these crystalline shapes, they're just repeating the pattern over and over again. And so I realized that Wikipedia is not really a scientific source, but it gave me the next best definition of crystals that helped me explain it. And they say that the scientific definition of a crystal is based on the microscopic arrangement of atoms inside it, called the crystal structure. A crystal is a solid where the atoms form a periodic arrangement. So did you know that the word crystal itself is used 5 times in the Bible? It's used in Job 28:17 alongside of gold. And as it's speaking of wisdom, Job says the gold and the crystal cannot equal it, and the exchange of it shall not be for jewels of fine gold. So not only are crystal and gold mentioned in this passage, but other precious materials are listed here as well. And crystal is also used in the book of Revelation and describes part of heaven. Crystal in the Bible is clear and transparent like glass. And so we have different kinds of crystals that have different colors, but in Revelation, the crystal is clear. You can see through it. So we find that precious stones are significant throughout the Bible. They're mentioned as early as Genesis chapter 2, and where it says the name of the first river is Pishon. It is the one which skirts the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and the onyx stone are there. So that's Genesis 2, verses 11 and 12. So, for me, I'm going, well, why would God care whether or not the gold and the onyx and the bdellium are mentioned in Genesis 2? But it is. Stones are very important. The gold is significant. It represents His holiness. Gold is used to cover the Holy of Holies. When the tabernacle is built, it's used to cover the table of showbread, and so there's just many places that gold is used throughout the Bible. But stones are important in Scripture too. So here's just a few examples of where stones are used in the Bible. Like I said, they're mentioned in chapter 2 when describing the Garden of Eden, gold and onyx and semi-precious stones. And even though bdellium is actually considered a resin and not really a true crystal, may not have the true crystalline pattern that we're thinking of. The Septuagint translates bdellium as a precious stone or crystal rather than a resin. And stones are also used as a witness in the Bible. So Jacob, when Jacob and the ladder, where he sees the angels going up and down the ladder, going from heaven to the earth. Well, after seeing that, Jacob anoints the stone that he used as a pillow during that famous dream about the ladder. And he anoints it as a witness that if God would keep him and feed him, that if he returned to his father's house, because he was running from his life from Esau, that if he would return to his father's house again in peace, he would give God 1/10 of everything he had. So that's Genesis 28. Verses 10 through 22. So Jacob used a stone as a witness. And one of the ways that crystals and other things are described as like being a battery. They hold energy, they hold charge. That is why silicon can be used in technology, is because it holds a charge. And the Bible tells us that the stones are going to be used as witnesses. Well, if something is going to be a witness, it has to be able to testify. It has to be able to speak, so to speak. So even though it doesn't have a mouth, it still has, it records what's going on, and it can be used as a witness. It's not just evidence, it's a witness. And Jacob used it as a witness when a covenant was made with Laban. So not only did he anoint the stone that he laid his head on, but when he was returning, like he said, if I return to my father's house, when he was returning and he and Laban were having issues, they were having differences of opinion. We won't get into the whole story, but basically it was so bad that they actually laid stones in a certain place so that if Laban wouldn't pass over, and if they did, that there would be trouble. So those stones were a witness of, we've made an agreement, and we're staying. You stay on your side, and I'll stay on my side. Now Moses and the elders of Israel saw the God of Israel in the wilderness, and this is in Exodus 24:12. And this is what the Bible verse says. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in his clearness. So that's another kind of stone, and we see that when the Ten Commandments and all of that are given. Now, the Ten Commandments is a little bit separate, so I don't want you to think I'm getting, things out of order. But Moses and the elders see God, They see the sapphire under him, the sapphire throne, and then the commandments, the 10 commandments that were given to the children of Israel were written on tablets of stone. So precious stones and crystals are throughout the Bible. Then, like I said, when we get to the building of the temple and getting the garments of the priest ready so that they can go in and minister to the Lord, they build a special breastplate for Aaron, and on that breastplate are the different crystals. He has 12 stones, and on the stones, each one represents a tribe of Israel, and that tribe's name was etched in. And this is something that Aaron wore over his heart as a memorial to the Lord, showing that he, the high priest Aaron, was interceding on behalf of all the people. So the priest also wore ephods with onyx on their shoulders. So they've got 12 stones here, plus 2 more here on their shoulders. Here are the stones that were worn on the high priest breastplate. So first is sardius. I'm giving the King James Version translation and then giving a possible translation. So first is sardius, which would be ruby, then topaz, then carbuncle. Next would be the emerald, then turquoise, sapphire, diamond, jacinth, agate, amethyst, beryl, shoham, which is onyx, and jasper. Okay, so let's jump out of the Old Testament and let's move to the back of the book to Revelation. And this is in Revelation 21:18 through 20, and it says, this is talking about the New Jerusalem, the new city. So the wall was made of jasper, and the city of pure as glass. The foundations of the city walls were decorated with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx or sardonyx, the sixth sardius, which may be a ruby, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. Now, not only is the New Jerusalem built with foundations of stone, believers are given white stones with a new name inscribed in them according to Revelation 2:17. And so there are a lot of instances of when stones, including precious stones, are mentioned in the Bible. And some of these passages describe the throne room of God. Like in Ezekiel, there's the emerald rainbow, there's the sapphire throne, there are beings and witnesses and memorials and covenants. So there are so many things where in the Bible stones and crystals are used. And even Hannah, who was the mother of the prophet Samuel, said of God, "There is none holy as the Lord, for as there is none beside thee, neither is there any rock like our God." And Deuteronomy 32:4 says, "He is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment, a God of truth without iniquity, and just and right is he." So, we're looking at this, and I know I'm going, Beth, this is, you're talking about crystals, and you're in natural health, and you're doing a lot of Bible stuff. Well, yeah, I know, and I'm not trying to overwhelm you with a lot of Bible stuff. I'm just trying to show you when I was working through teaching the class, all of the scripture that I went through, all of the things that I went to. Even Peter, when he had his great revelation moment that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, Jesus turned around and said to him, "You are Peter," and that meant rock. And on this rock, I'm going to build my church. And God refers to himself as our rock and our fortress. And so there's something, the whole point of this and the whole thing of why I'm doing this is I'm getting into, there's something pretty special about rocks and stones and crystals if God uses them, if God is the one who says, hey, put this in my throne room. Hey, put this on the breastplate of the high priest when he comes in to minister before me. Let's build the new Jerusalem out of these beautiful stones. If his attributes of his very nature is a strong foundation, if he is a rock and a refuge, then it makes sense to me that there's something special about rocks and crystals. And so why would I want to miss out on some of the things that he has for us? And so, that is what I'm looking at, is when I say God created rocks. He was there first. He created the crystals. He created the gemstones. He likens himself. He says, I'm a rock. He surrounds himself with beautiful things, beautiful stones, and he does it to show and demonstrate his beauty, his beautiful qualities, who he is. Ladies, we love wearing beautiful jewelry with beautiful gemstones and crystals because they are beautiful. So the use of crystals and rocks belongs to God first. It belongs to God first. So when believers use crystals, we can actually use them to glorify God because they were created by him, and everything that was created by him has been created for his glory. Even Jesus is the one who said, and he answered and said unto them, I tell you that if these should hold their peace, talking about people, these stones would immediately cry out. And that's in Luke chapter 19, verse 40. So how are the stones going to cry out? Do stones have a mouth? Of course not. But they do have energy. And their energy is their voice. Everything has energy and everything has frequency. We know this today. This is a scientific knowledge of today. And crystals have energy too. And it's those unique crystalline patterns that make up our different crystals and gemstones. And each one, these put off a different frequency than a quartz or amethyst or jasper. Each frequency is different that is emitted by these stones, so they can, quote unquote, cry out. So, there is a lot of information on energy and healing and how frequencies affect the physical body. We know that there are sound frequencies that when we listen to certain notes on the scale, that has a healing effect on the body. We know that there's light therapy and that different lights, colored lights, can be used to help with healing in the body. And so there's just more that we can go into in covering of how the different frequencies can help heal the body. So I don't want to get lost in a lot of detail here. I want to kind of explore this. And if you're still with me as we're going through this, because like I said, I know I'm just giving this really big, long foundation, but it's like I really want to explore this with you. I really want to see, how this fits with you, and let's talk about this more, maybe get into what the different crystals do and things like that. But I also want to make sure that we're using them wisely. Now, are there people who are perhaps using crystals in an ungodly way? Yes. Are there some people who are using them innocently, and yet there may be something with the crystals that they're unaware of that may be carrying a negative or even evil energy to it? Yes. If we look in the book of Ezekiel 13, in verses 17 through 21, God rebukes certain women, and he calls them, the passage describes them as false prophetesses who hunt the souls of my people. So here's what it says. It says, woe to the women that sew pillows to armholes and make kerchiefs upon the heads of every stature to hunt souls. Will you hunt the souls of my people, and will you save the souls alive that come unto you? And so in this, these women are using objects. So in some versions, this is the King James version that I'm using. In some versions of the Bible, the translation is magic charms or bands or amulets or veils. And the idea is that there is a deceptive spiritual practice going on. The Hebrew term for bands or coverings is kesatot, and for veils is mispakot. And so the scholars have interpreted these words as, or terms as, magical accessories worn on the arms or on the head. And they were likely meant to invoke or channel spiritual power. So it was a physical tool in the occult, in an occult ritual. So how does that apply to us today, right? Because we're wanting to recognize the counterfeit, but we're wanting to, restore what God has created and meant for good and has been twisted and turned. But how do we recognize? So this is one of those things where we want to just recognize that God rebuked those who were using, now whether they were actual crystals or not, because it just says charms or objects, but they were using them to hunt souls and to manipulate spiritual power through physical items. And that's the kind of thing that we want to avoid. Are we using these items to manipulate spiritual power? And I just want to kind of pause right here and say, not only have I used, the howlite bracelet around my wrist to help with dampen the EMF that's coming from my watch, but, I remember when my granddaughter was young and she was having trouble sleeping at night. And I don't remember if my daughter just didn't have the essential oil lavender in her house, or if she, was, because she doesn't like the smell. This particular daughter doesn't like the smell of lavender. So she may not have wanted to give her a lavender bath, because then she would have smelled of lavender for the next day or two, right? So I was like, well, rose crystal, the very light pink crystal, is very calming and soothing. I was like, why don't you just put that in her bath and see if that helps? And so it did. It helped calm her down, so that she could sleep well. And so that's, the kind of use that I use crystals for. I don't go to them for my healing. I don't use them to manipulate my circumstances. I don't use them to predict a path or the future or a way that I should go. And so that's the danger. It's not the stone itself that's the danger, right? It's the invitation of a false spirit through the created object. It's the invitation to use it in a way that it was not meant to be used, and to direct us away from our God and Creator and His power and majesty and healing, right? So, I'm looking at it and going, I believe in God and Jesus for healing, and yet I still go to the doctor sometimes. I believe in God and Jesus for healing, and yet I'll still drink an herbal cup of tea. So I'm still using things that He created and provided for my healing, and so for me, I'm going, if I am wise and discerning, then I can use them. But you do have to be aware that not all crystals are clean, and they are spiritual batteries. Crystals are are batteries. They hold energy. And they, like silicon, I mentioned that because they're used in technology, but they hold spiritual energy as well. And so, that's part of the issue is what kind of energy is it using? Because if Jacob can anoint a stone and say, this is a special stone, it's a witness to me, that was holding a good energy. It was holding a witness of when God came down, or the angels came up and down the ladder and met with him. So that was a good energy. Or is it being used by some as a not good thing, to, ensnare the souls of others. So if this is one of those things where you're sitting here and you're watching and it says, and you're going, you know what, it just might be best to stay away from these things altogether, then I honor you for doing that, because there is, we do want to be wise. We do want to be discerning. But I also just, say exercise your spiritual senses, walk in discernment, and go, is this something that has been used that that for not good things, or is this something that I can use with a pure heart, and put it on my wrist so that it's dampening the electromagnetic field. There are some jewelry, like I have a rainbow jasper that when I wear, I can feel a nice calming energy around me. It's like I'm not going to it necessarily to go, oh, heal me, make me better, or anything like that. I'm not worshiping the creation. I'm worshiping the creator who created it. And he created stones to be beautiful and identify with him, right? So if you are wondering, can I use crystals? Can I wear them and use them to help, with the various things that they do? If you've been listening and you've been wondering, how can I use crystals? How can I know that they're safe to use and things like that? Have I gotten crystals before that I've used and gone, wow, that just doesn't feel good. There's a negative energy with that. Yes, I have. So you want to start with the source of where you're getting them. Remember that God is the source. He is the creator. But there are also sources that you can go to. So you might want to go to a place that, just sells crystals, as far as they're not necessarily a new age store or something like that. So understand that there are places that you can get them from. When we understand that these crystals are God's creation and that they can store and transmit energy, and you've got quartz in your watch, right? And you've got magnets in your MRIs and imaging, and they're used in all manner of ways. It's not mystical. It's measurable physics. It's something that you can use, and it has either an uplifting effect or a calming effect or something like that. So we're recognizing that their natural properties don't have to make them a spiritual tool. It acknowledges how beautifully and wonderfully they're designed and created. And that's what we have to keep in mind first, is that we're not doing something bad. We're not necessarily, overstepping the bounds and practicing witchcraft or anything like that. What we are doing is we're just saying they are created by God. God has them in his throne room. He created them in the earth, and they have a beautiful design. So that's one of those things that we want to make sure is, yes, there are people who use them for invoking power in and through the object. And so this can be something that crosses in the spiritual territory that the scripture warns us about. That's what we want to do, is we want to make sure, going back to the source, is this something that it's just, because a lot of times just a good mind. I live in Georgia. There are mines here and in North Carolina. And so just because it came from the ground doesn't mean that it's going to be a problem. So just look at it and go, where did I get it from, right? We want to look to God as our healer, of course, but also recognize that God uses things. He uses herbs, he uses sunshine, he uses water, he uses the things he created to help us, who he also created, to heal. And so that's really just kind of, this is where I'm going with it. I know this is a hot topic. I know, because I've been on the internet. I've looked at videos from others who have YouTube channels out there, and they're going, stay away from them. They're all bad. They're all evil. And I don't believe that's true. I believe that God created everything perfectly and beautifully, and it's our heart posture of how we're using them. And if we're not using them in practices that are, not godly, if we're not using them in that way, then it's not a problem for me to wear a bracelet that helps, to help to shield my body from harmful frequencies. It's not bad to put up a shield of protection. So we want to just make sure that we're not using things to outside of God, outside of what God has created, to get power, to harness power, or things like that. Another thing that, when I was writing the article and I was thinking about how, this is not necessarily a stone, but I wrapped up the article, the blog that I wrote on crystals and Christianity, and I thought about how Jesus, when he was healing, because Jesus is our healer, right? It's by his stripes that we are healed. And what I thought about as I was wrapping up the article and how I ended it was, when Jesus, one of the blind men that Jesus healed, he didn't just touch. He actually reached down into the dirt. He reached down into the dirt, and then he spat into his hand, and he made mud, and he maybe he created brand new eyeballs for this guy. I don't know. Maybe he just put mud on the outside of his eyelids. I don't know exactly what he did, but he took something from the ground and he used it for healing. And so sometimes I think about that, is that if we're afraid to use crystals because it's not Jesus himself healing us, then I look at what Jesus did, where he took something from the earth that he created to heal someone. And so, can crystals help our healing journey? I believe they can. Do we want to just go get any crystal anywhere? Maybe not, because if they have been, infused with something spiritually from those who are not practicing godly ways, then it might be a problem. And yes, I realize that I'm probably, upsetting some apple carts and things like that. And I don't mean to, but I feel like, what God created, we need to not just throw out just because we haven't understood it or it's been misused in some way. So if this has been something that you're going, hey, I'm intrigued by this, I want to talk about this a little bit more, I want to hear more what you have to say about these things, would you please give me a like? I'm welcome comments. Please be kind, be nice in the comments. We want to make sure that, the comments are, I want you can share your thoughts. I don't mind that at all, but be kind, be nice, and just share your thoughts. Subscribe, hit the like button, and thank you so much for joining me as I just kind of went out there and just shared my thoughts on, if God created it, is it something that we can use? And is it something we can redeem and bring back? So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.